Hello, thanks for listening to the Go Beyond Disruption podcast, where we share insights from inside the accounting and finance profession that help you stay ahead of the curve, whatever sector you work in. I'm Kyle Hannon, and I'm based here at the AICPA and CIMA office in the heart of London's financial district. This week's episode is called From Negatives to Positives, how to flip the script on customer complaints. To help us understand what that's all about, we'll be talking to expert guest Marcia Tal. Marcia is the CEO of Tal Solutions. She's the founder of the Positivity Tech Intelligent Platform, and she is an expert on data. So she'll be giving us the inside track on getting real financial value from a much better understanding of listening to the voice of customers, how to do that in new ways, and how to use that approach to get new insights. And she'll also be telling us about this platform she's developing, which helps make this all easier. What Marcia will do is give us some new understandings of how financial institutions can make better use of their customer data. She'll explore the predictive capabilities of enterprise data, advanced analytics. We'll hear about how her Positivity Tech platform helps these institutions to identify and then implement new revenue generating opportunities which impact the bottom line. And that to you and me means profit and loss. And then she'll be talking us from the P&L to the AI, how to utilize artificial intelligence and machine learning to reveal unexpected opportunities in customer complaints. Who knew? She'll also then tell us about how accounting and finance professionals can go beyond disruption by leveraging information from individual customers and doing some quite unexpectedly useful things with it. And of course, because it is Cybersecurity Month, we might ask her how we can make sure that data is kept safe. If anyone knows, it's Marcia. So there's plenty of valuable insights on the way. And of course, once you've listened to this episode, you can explore the links and get other information in the show notes which accompany it. And you'll find those in the podcast app that you are using. So let's get started with this week's conversation. Hello, Marcia. Where are you joining us from today?
Hi, Kyle. I'm in New York City.
Give us a sense of where you're sitting. Are you 2/3 of the way up a skyscraper? Are you in a brownstone? What's your view like at the moment?
I'm actually sitting in my office. My offices are in Long Island City, Queens, which is right over the Queensboro Bridge from Midtown Manhattan.
Talking of views, let me give people an overview of what you're all about. We've said that you're the visionary, the CEO, the person who's put this Positivity Tech Intelligent Platform together. You concentrate on transforming negatives to positives. And it's a platform which combines human insights, which is a big part of what our podcast focuses on, that cusp of human intelligence and machine intelligence. And what you've done is mix the two to really enable strategic growth opportunities which are hidden in customer complaints. And your Positivity platform helps uncover those. And your own background comes from a long time spent in consumer banking, as I understand it. And you've spent your career where voice of consumers meets advanced analytics. Now, to me, I'm not an expert in it, but fortunately you are. And you gained that expertise working in the decision management department, I believe, of Citigroup. You were the executive vice president of decision management. And that's where you built and ran a global function, bringing advanced analytics capabilities to 30 countries. So you'll be able to give us the inside track on getting real financial value from better understanding the voices of your customers and turning that into insights which help the business. And you'll be talking to us about your Positivity Tech platform. Let's get started with what I might have left out about you. What else are you working on today?
One of the things that I find most important in my work is really to raise the voices of your customers and for businesses to understand that they have this most valuable asset in their customer's voice. And the idea, though, is that you really need to be able to listen. And listening to your customers, in particular in your customers' complaints, can become a critical part of your success. My goal is to help organizations understand that they would look at complaints not as a drain on resources, but actually as a critical source of information that can be used to power their success and proactively strengthen their business. So how do you go about doing that? The way that I've approached this is I've thought about customer complaints as a data set, almost as a portfolio. And at the same time, we're using advanced technologies to reveal within the customer's voices, the customer's narrative, unexpected opportunities. We're finding hidden pieces of information that are helping us to direct particular actions that organizations can take in order to help keep them ahead of the competition.
Marcia, this is in many ways flipping the script because many people tend to ignore or put customer complaints to one side. But are you saying that this is something that companies up until now haven't really understood can actually be an asset instead of a liability?
What I'm saying is that the way in which organizations today are listening to and responding to their customer complaints, because they are, and there's a lot of focus on this topic, but they're doing it almost by the ones as a transaction. So what's happening is for every customer complaint that comes in, an organization is responding in some way to it. However, what happens as a result of that response and the exchange that takes place and the conversation that takes place and the information that the customer is sharing is not something that's really being explored further in conjunction with the way other customers are discussing the issues that are bothering them. So if you imagine, for example, that the way in which organizations address customer complaints usually is in their operations organizations, and they're doing this as a set of important transactions. What we're doing is we're taking a step back. We're integrating all of that information. We understand that it's not only what each customer is telling you, but it's what all of your customers are telling you. And the way in which we're doing that is we have basically a 4-step process where we're trying to understand. First, we're trying to identify actually what are the early warnings of these complaints and what are the pain points that can be illuminated. Then we're trying to understand these complaints through the use of keywords that are providing deeper meaning into the complaints that the organization is receiving. And then we're using, as you said earlier, different type of advanced analytic techniques to predict and uncover what triggers there are that are going to help you identify those complaints before they happen. Ultimately, culminating in prevention, where we're really trying to recommend the specific actions that will eliminate future complaints by linking it back to the financial impact of that type of an issue or complaint.
Right. So let's see if I've got this right. So you identify, you understand, you predict, and you prevent, which seems perfectly logical. But you're saying that up until now, there hasn't really been a full appreciation of how all of that can be tied together to actually take all of these and really point them at what a customer is actually able to tell a business about how they could do things better. But this is not simply looking at what's just happened. You're also saying that this can help you look ahead. You said that this can help you almost see the future, or is it just foresee future complaints and their causes? Tell us something about what your platform does there.
I will. And maybe as you had given the introduction to my background, one of the things that I'll say is that oftentimes there's a common approach to how you actually use your data, right? And how you actually analyze your data for the purpose of prediction and prevention. So these steps that you just described and that I described, such as identify, understand, predict, prevent, this is really an entire framework. This is an approach to how you work with your data around specific issues. And in this particular case, we are using this framework and this approach to analyze customer voices that are coming into an organization. We are focused on the complaint aspect of these customers' voices, and we are using the data, therefore, to go through the process of identification, understanding, predict, and prevent. And in regard to foreseeing future complaints, the way in which we do this is we've actually built scores, predictive algorithms, and we've done this around key pain points that we understand organizations are struggling with. Such pain points might be account closure. So oftentimes I think you would understand that as customers complain, you would be worried that the account would close. So we look to see the relationship between these types of complaints and future account closure. We also look to see the relationship of these complaints to different types of enforcement actions or regulatory actions or lawsuits that can come as a result of these complaints. And the way we do this is we look to identify the severity of the complaint in combination with the volume or the number of complaints that you're receiving, so that one wouldn't only think that if you have a few complaints, it's not a big deal. It actually can be a big deal. And the way in which we do that is we've predicted and we've created our own proprietary severity score. We do that based on the language, using natural language processing, using different types of techniques. And from those types of techniques, we are able to assess the severity of a complaint and then address what actions need to be taken in the future.
And this stems directly from work that you were doing, for example, at Citigroup, where you built up this core expertise of data infrastructure, blending that with advanced analytic capabilities. And you've done that in the context of large financial services operations. So has that changed at all, or are you still focusing on a particular sector and client type? Give us a sense of who you're mainly working with at the moment and how you're helping them.
Yes, so I mainly work with financial institutions. And you're exactly right that one of the things that I've learned over the course of my career is the ability to transfer best practices. So I used to have a way that I would explain to the teams, right, that a lot of the work that we do is common, but then there's definitely work that's unique. And the idea of driving efficiency within this space of advanced analytic capabilities is really to understand what areas are common, what are the techniques and the approaches and these frameworks that are common across many different types of applications, and then what is it that makes this particular application unique. So that is the type of work that I do today within financial services, and then the focus that I have for Positivity Tech and the Positivity Tech platform and building this really what I consider to be an entire ecosystem is really about this idea of taking that framework of the way in which you uncover these different opportunities and applying it to voice and narrative data without even bringing in other behavioral data at this point.
And I'm right in assuming that on the one hand, you can say, well, obviously there are two types of impacts on the bottom line that this could lead to. One, the more complaints you have, the more it might threaten your bottom line. But the better you deal with them, the more you're able to gain insights from and translate that intelligence into some type of remedial work, improvement in the way that you deal within the company and externally towards your customers and your partners. That then can see the bottom line boosted. It can help in two ways. Stops the rot, but also sees things switch to the up. Am I right? Or is there another impact on the bottom line that we may be missing out on here?
No, I think that there are a couple of key messages and takeaways, right? So, customer complaints, by the way, they're not limited to just one area of the business, right? Because strategic growth is everyone's business when you're in an institution. And we also understand that any complaint has the ability to be unpacked for value. And we break down those complaints. We look at their component language. We do that by revealing, therefore, deeper insights. We also understand that listening drives growth. And we also understand that knowing your customer will enable you to provide a superior customer experience. So the way in which we're really integrating our technology and the solutions that we have is that what we've done is we've basically, built a system that both self-identifies, visualizes, and automates the delivery of this type of analysis without manual intervention. And what we're aiming to do is take both our domain expertise around the technology and our business experience and put that together in a way that makes it seamless for our clients to be able to gain this type of intelligence.
Having called this episode From Negatives to Positives, How to Flip the Script in Customer Complaints, I'm getting a sense that this is something that is really important right now. Why do you think that this topic is so important to really focus on?
Well, I think that in businesses, the main focus right now is improving the customer experience. And you can sense this by all of the different types of work and companies that are out there focused on what people are calling customer journey, customer experience, net promoter scores, all of these types of both tools and capabilities where the goal is to ensure kind of a more positive customer experience. However, with all of these tools and driving towards a positive customer experience, we believe that, the opportunity to transform from negative to positive is where the biggest opportunity lies. So if you really want to take, and get to a positive experience, you want to go all the way back to those leading indicators that are driving some of your negative experiences. The way in which we do that is we focus on complaints as a category. And then within that category, we uncover those critical patterns. And that can come from a perspective of compliance, what in financial institutions we call safety and soundness. It can be about, following regulation, making sure your business is protected, as well as it can be about understanding the particular aspects of maybe your products and services that have an opportunity to be improved so that you can have strategic growth.
And you mentioned compliance and safety, and I believe it is January that we see the introduction of CCPA, and then as many as 14 other states in the US adopting that or something similar. We've seen that as a direct response to the adoption of GDPR across the European Union. Obviously, the more data that comes into a business, the more you've got to keep an eye on security as well. So I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts on that, because your background comes from this type of work inside very large organizations that were working within data-intensive environments. Tell us something else about how your background helped lead you to this new venture.
Absolutely. So having come from financial services, having spent part of my career in risk management, having done many different business audits, both internally and across our different markets, I would say that we had set a couple of core criteria in the way in which we brought our product to market. The first thing that we say is that data and technology together both have to be in a secure and stable environment. And the way in which we did that basically is we decided to keep our data management platform and our cloud solutions separate, so that we ensured that there was autonomy and flexibility as much as there was security. What we did is we made sure that we weren't transferring any type of personally identifiable information, any other sensitive data. We picked a partner who we believe is best in class and has the best in class expertise around rigorous data security, privacy, safety protocols, the best in the industry. And we had them work with us building our data infrastructure, our data ingestion engine, our data governance. And then from there, we went to a Microsoft Azure cloud-based platform and enhanced that with multiple rings of security so that we would have basically enable both seamless scalability without any degradation of performance, all within a secure environment. So I think in summary, my background and sensitivity to the requirements when you're building such an ecosystem, such a platform, such a set of solutions, is that first and foremost, you have to protect all types of data and you have to ensure that your environment is safe and secure.
And am I right in assuming that this is not something that happens no matter how protected it may be? This does not happen in silo, because when one organization when an industry does this in one part of the world, it's seen as best in class, it's seen as best practice. it soon is likely to see that happening far and wide in a globalized economy. So these are talking about US-based examples, for example, Citigroup or where you're working right now. But you've seen this have impact in more than just one territory. So you know how important it is once you start to make it consistent and scalable.
And that's what I was saying before about common and unique. The approach can be common, but there is absolutely a uniqueness to each market. Each market has its own culture. It has parameters that drive the way in which customers interact. Those are unique. However, the platform, the capabilities, the technology, the methods, those are repeatable. And that's how you drive scale from market to market.
And you're seeing opportunities to learn, to see insights, and then to convert that to action and then potentially to growth. But with every new technology comes new jargon, new abbreviations, and we'll be talking about some of those soon. But disruption and innovation has always been with us. So let's take you back a bit, perhaps when you were working across those 30 countries for Citigroup. What was the last big disruption you saw in the profession, and how did it change the organizations that you were working with?
Well, I think in my area of focus, right, the biggest disruption was really how we were bringing digital capabilities to the forefront, how that was changing the way in which customers were engaging with us, and therefore, with the extent of the data that we had and the opportunities that we had, how were we going to refuel, how were we going to rebuild our businesses to represent the opportunities of the future, a bank of the future, so to speak. And in that regard, at the core was our data and information, were our channels, were the tools that we had, whether it was different types of predictive tools, machine learning capabilities, neural networks, natural language processing, all of these things we were working to be able to now introduce those types of solutions into the digital capabilities that not only our bank, but all banks were doing. And in fact, I had spent an awful lot of time on the whole idea of omni-channel, right? Omni-channel capabilities at the core are coming from a 360-degree view and understanding of your customer. That happens when your data environment, when your data structures are set up, when your tools are aligned, and also very much aligned with the Positivity Tech platform, when you understand your customers holistically and you can listen to them in different ways.
So how does your way of doing it differ from what may have come before?
Well, again, I think our area of focus is in particularly around particular data sets and capabilities that haven't been focused on. So focusing on the narratives, just the words that our customers are, and the way in which they're expressing their kind of either satisfaction and or dissatisfaction with us. We're focused on the dissatisfaction. The way in which we're doing that is we're building our own proprietary tools. We've built our own proprietary lexicon built on financial language because, believe it or not, to our knowledge, one didn't exist. We did a lot of research. From that research, we understood that the language that's going to go into our scores has to be focused on the industry that we're working in. So we built our own lexicon, we built our own scores, we tried to understand basically the accuracy of the off-the-shelf products versus the ones that we were building so that we could provide our clients with the best possible capabilities. And that's how we're bringing it all the way to the current state.
This might seem like a silly question, but is that a really difficult thing to do? What kind of work goes into doing something like this for the first time? This is very difficult. I think it's challenging, but it's so challenging for all the right reasons. So the reason that I'm focused on this and the reason why I wanted to do this is because exactly of my background where I spent decades listening to customer calls where I would try and relate those customer calls to customer behaviors.
And I recognized that, and at that time, we were not living in the world we are today. So, data environments, data structures, different types of tools weren't available. And if they were much more expensive. We'd have to do more homegrown than we would have to be able to buy products. And today we have an entire fintech industry. And within the fintech industry, others just like me are driving their passion, right, around particular pain points that in my case, that I saw from my experience in working in a large global premier institution. And now I want to take those and I want to basically be able to provide solutions that if I was still working in that institution, I would love to have. And that's really my goal. My goal is really to come full circle on what I had seen the opportunity to be maybe 10, 15 years ago, but now have the capability to build it.
It's exciting. And with all these abbreviations, you've been talking about things like NLP, ML, machine learning, AI, which to many people means artificial intelligence. To others, it may mean just assisted information. You've been talking about fintech, financial technology. Let's bring it all down to nuts and bolts and get an idea from you about what this all means in practice. What are some case studies or some client stories that you can give us?
Great. So I'd love to give an example. Recently, I published an article in my newsletter, which is Framework. My newsletter is called Framework. And I published an article where I explored deeply complaints around overdraft fees. And why did I focus on overdraft fees? Because overdraft fees continue to be a big source of frustration. From customers, and also it is a complex issue for institutions because overdraft fees are linked to other policies and procedures that, an institution really has to connect when they're addressing the different types of frustrations. So when we actually decided, well, let's go into the database that we have and let's understand more about these customer frustrations related to overdraft fees. And what did we learn? We learned that these types of complaints that are related to overdraft fees are 24% worse than those of the average complaint. And we also learned that there are different reasons why people are coming into this issue of overdraft fees. It's not just when customer funds are low. It can also be when a customer is closing on a mortgage. It can be timing. It can be that, you were relying on money to transfer from one account to another account. It didn't arrive on time. There are lots of reasons that there are frustrations around these fees that customers are getting charged. We also saw that there's an assumption in the industry that customers who have overdraft fees are high risk. However, what we found by just reading and analyzing the narratives and the different reasons for overdraft is, in fact, they're not just high-risk customers. There is a mix of high and low-risk customers. And when you have a mix of customers, it means that you need to go deeper into the data and you need to understand the core reasons as to why these fees are being charged. We also understood that the response that financial institutions were basically taking to these fees is they were providing monetary relief. And so almost in almost half of the cases, right, monetary relief was being brought back to the customer. However, one could argue, is that really the solution? Is that the long-term solution? Is that the one that's really required at that particular point in time? And lastly, what I would say is that these fees and the presence of overdraft fees is not going away. In the last 12 months, the customer complaints about overdraft fees has increased by 300%, right? And that this basically is telling us this is a wide pain point and one that we need to deeply understand and ultimately be able to act upon.
And you've done something proprietary, haven't you? Because you were talking about those scores and you've said that perhaps there's a different way that you can use categorizations or delineation of this data to start telling a different story. Tell us a little bit more about your severity score, which you've come up with.
Yes, so the severity score is really using just the language, the narrative that the customer is using. So it could be in written form, it could be in spoken form, right? And that we understand basically the use of their language with the severity of the complaint. And so we've built an entire set of tools around that. We also, the same technique, by the way, can be used when you're categorizing your complaints. We also hear in the marketplace that there's a lot of challenges in having standard complaint categories. These things all go together, right? You want your complaint categories to be reflective of the severity of complaints so that you're really focused on the areas that are most severe and most impactful for you as an organization. And the impact of that will come either in P&L form or in regulatory responses, and that these severities, which is based on customers' word choice, tone, duplication, will really help you in keeping focused and identifying new sources of opportunities.
For someone who's starting to look at customer complaint data, what type of things would you suggest that as a good practice, if there was a little starter pack, where should they look? What should they be looking for? How do they turn this into an asset for their business? Let's say it's not a huge bank, but perhaps a smaller practice.
I think the first step is even having the ability to bring all of that data together in a way that it can be looked at holistically. So that in and upon itself is one thing that's critical to be able to gain the value back from your customer complaints. The other thing I would say is in the way we approached it is we created basically an automated dashboards, because the way we looked at it is there were critical questions that we thought any organization would want to be able to answer. And those questions might be, well, what are my biggest issues, right? From the standpoint of my customer complaints, what are the biggest issues that we have? The next question might be, well, in what products are these issues really prevalent? So, for example, the issues in the products may go together, they may not, right? So oftentimes, an organization might have a higher penetration in one set of products versus another. So you would expect the volume to be higher, but that the specific severity of an issue may be coming from a different product. So it's important to understand that. The third question we ask, and one which we're hearing a lot of support on, is basically how do my complaints compare to my competitors? And we talk about this in the context of market share. And we all know that in a strategic way, when we talk about market share, we look to gain market share. However, if you start to calculate your complaint market share, you obviously would want to reduce it. And the way in which we need to understand how to do that is compare ourselves to our competitors. So we basically enable our clients to be able to compare not only the top issues as it relates to their competitors, but to actually look at the different types of narratives that are going across the industry. And lastly, we look to help institutions understand their top complaints and how they're changing over time. So over time, as we know, is an important dimension to understanding change and the robustness of what's really happening in your business.
We'll continue our conversation about that and so much more coming up in this episode of the Go Beyond Disruption podcast. It's brought to you by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. You can find out more about the podcast and about the rest of our project at gobeyonddisruption.com. If you're a first-time listener to the podcast, welcome. There's a lot more you could be listening to as well. We're almost 80 episodes in as of early October 2019, and you can find those on our webpage. Just go to gobeyonddisruption.com, scroll to the bottom. You'll see a link which says subscribe to this podcast. Nothing to pay, totally free. Just click on that and you'll see all previous episodes. And of course, those will get to you automatically on your podcast app as they come out. We are talking to Marcia Tal about the positivity tech platform that she's developed to help do really interesting and important new things with the customer data that so many enterprises and companies are starting to realize the value of, but also having to take responsibility for dealing carefully with. We're talking about flipping the script on customer complaints. Marcia Tal, we were talking about some really interesting real-life examples that showed how financial institutions can flip the script on these customer complaints. You were talking about complaints on overdraft fees, how those, once explored, told us a lot more than we realized, and how you came up with your own way of analyzing and defining what that data could be telling us about how what we do affects those who we work for. And by that, I don't mean our employees. I mean our customers.
Yes. I think that in regard to a multifaceted approach, I actually think that the first thing we need to do is recognize, become aware that our complaints in this example are really strategic intelligence. So if you were thinking about an intelligence process, obviously it also has a multifaceted approach. So we're not looking just at individual issues. We're looking almost at a portfolio of issues, and we are working them as strategic intelligence. And so when you look at a business and or a portfolio and or sets of customer issues in that way, you need to consider many things. You need to consider where these complaints may be highlighting different types of risk. You may need to consider how the language that's being used can help you predict future issues. You need to identify the different types of severity of these complaints and ultimately flag higher risk customers so that you'll be able to prioritize different types of actions. You need to understand the environmental risks that are coming from unresolved complaints, right? You have public relations risks, you have lawsuits, you have enforcement actions. These are all multifaceted dimensions, right, to the way in which you're addressing your complaints. And also, I think, and most importantly, we need to understand that when complaints aren't resolved, customers really don't stop complaining. They continue to complain, and then they go beyond your institution and they complain to other sources that are going to cause even further risk to your business. And we also know that most customers actually do not complain, but are experiencing the same kinds of issues. So in this multifaceted approach, when you really understand the root cause and the sources, and you can identify and understand, then when you're predicting future complaints, you're predicting it across your entire set of customers, not only those that will complain, but those that are basically experiencing the same thing but are not complaining. I believe there's a statistic that says for every 4 customers who complain, 26 don't. So we know that this is actually a larger issue that is impacting your company's performance.
And let's just be clear about what that statistic actually means. You're not saying that there are 26 satisfied customers for every 4 that complain. What you are saying is that there are another 26 that are dissatisfied but haven't bothered to complain. What they will do is simply go somewhere else.
Exactly. And the solutions that we're identifying are not solely to those customers who complained, right? But we're addressing the issues and preventing future sources of those complaints. So it addresses the entire population, not only those who complain.
So here's a question which might come out of left field slightly, because you did talk about the fact that there are customer behaviors that once you start looking at how those same customers complain, you then start to learn that not only are there different customers, but there are different complaint styles. And you did say that there are people who may be serial complainers. They may be complaining to you about many different products or services of yours that they may be using. But there are also people who are duplicate complainers. These are not people who are simply complaining to you again and again, the serial complainers, but you've also got people who may be complaining in the same way to many other companies at the same time. And all of that has to be something that you factor into the way you intelligently analyze the data that those complaints are giving you.
Yes, and we call that a halo effect.
But not in a good way.
Absolutely. Yes, but the way in which we're looking to identify and solve that is by monitoring both the market and the entire industry in terms of the impact of one institution's misstep. So for example, right, if a customer is complaining about a particular issue, we know also that customers don't have relationships just with one institution. So what's happening with one institution absolutely can be happening in another. So one institution's missteps is having the halo effect on other institutions. And we see this, and that's why we look to monitor the market and the industry. We look to also understand that these rising complaints, right, they attract media attention. And basically that media attention is amplifying those customer voices. And as a result of that is also potentially driving even further regulatory scrutiny. So we're trying to prioritize different business actions based on these early recognition of high-risk customer interactions. So both a leading indicator, early recognition, as well as monitoring the market and the industry are ways that we can be ahead of the potential impact that these complaints can have.
You've said a lot of stuff there, which I think is going to make people sit up and pay attention. You said press, media, and regulatory scrutiny. You talked about tracking customer behavior across many different service providers. So you're in some way following behaviors, not necessarily people, from one company to how they may be engaging via their complaints with others. So on the eve of the introduction at the beginning of next year of the CCPA, which is the California Consumer Protection Act, which is all about the protection of data, what can you say about how the security of this data is absolutely front and center part of where we go forward?
I've built this entire platform based on the fact that we were going to have a secure environment at every level, meaning both data management in our cloud layers, and that we would take the best-in-class capabilities and those organizations that are most known for their rigorous data security and their privacy safety protocols in the industry, and those would be the organizations that would be working with us to build this platform. So having said that, at least in terms of by design and in practice, we have taken that into account. The other thing I'd like to say is that when customers complain, in fact, the customer is telling us what it is that we need to know, what we need to listen to. And oftentimes the customer is complaining not only within the firewalls of a particular institution, they are taking that same complaint out into the market and into the public. So it is very important for an institution to be able to understand and align kind of what's happening within their own customer base and also how that is aligned with what's happening outside. And there are many tools today that are focused on that, right, within social media capabilities. So a lot of people are focused on that. My focus is really more on the information that's happening within an organization. And because of that, I went through the route of working with these companies that have the most rigorous data security and privacy safety protocols, and oftentimes where these institutions house their data to begin with.
And these are good practices that any organization, no matter what service provider they may use, it may be a platform like yours, the Positivity Tech platform, it may be others, respect and take responsibility for their data. That has to be a part of anything that anyone does going forward. Isn't that the case?
Yes. And so in the case of Positivity Tech, for example, we don't need personally identifiable information. We don't need PII because remember, we're not a workflow management platform. The outcome of our work is not impacting individual customers. We are really looking strategically. We're a strategic platform. We're informing businesses as to where their opportunities are, basically to flip the script, right, from negatives to positives. And we're doing that by looking at the environment holistically. It's a strategic framing. And basically, we're complementing the workflow systems, but we are not a workflow system. And as a result of that, we don't need PII data and other sensitive data. We need the narratives, the words, and the voices of the customers. And we're looking to raise those voices and to make sure that those voices are heard.
And when you have a financial institution that is wanting to go bravely forward into this new data-rich world where all these insights beckon, we have to think that someone's got to take responsibility for starting that ship turning, for putting their hands on the wheel. And if a financial institution is going to make better use of their customer data, who would you say typically would be the person in that organization who would start the ball rolling? Because obviously you've got all sorts of suggestions. There may be compliance officers. Is it marketing? Is it operations? Where does this kind of thing start before a financial institution can really get going with making better use of their customer data? What's the job role on the door that we should go knocking on?
In fact, what we're finding is that the Positivity Tech platform is built for the C-suite. It enables senior executives to have what I like to think of as intimate access to the voice of their customer right on their screen in whatever way they want to read or analyze those types of complaints they can. And as I said earlier, customer complaints is everyone's business, so is strategic growth. Having said that, our initial meetings happen with senior executives that are running across the organization. So, for example, it can actually be with a chief marketing officer and a CEO, and then they will bring in their chief analytic officer. It can be with a chief risk officer and a chief compliance officer that would then bring in their chief operations or technology officer. So we're finding that in different organizations, the structures are slightly different. The companies that are really embracing the Positivity Tech platform and the philosophy of complaints becoming a critical part of your success is across the C-suite.
So one thing I don't think we've talked about is once a complaint is made and you can resolve it, you can tick a box. But what can you say about the risks of unresolved complaints? What's something that people need to take into account when a customer's complaint isn't dealt with and what the customer would say would be the right way?
Yes, the risk there is absolutely one where, and in fact, those are the types of tools that we built, where you're at risk of a customer leaving you, you're at risk of a customer filing a lawsuit, you're at risk of a regulatory institution focusing in more on what your customer is saying and looking at some type of an enforcement action. You're at risk, if you're in a financial institution, of your customer deciding that they're just not going to pay you because they're so frustrated. There are lots and lots and lots of risks. And oftentimes, even this takes you into risk management because when you're assessing risk, you're also not bringing in this type of data to go all the way back to understand the source of the problem. And so what we're really trying to do is go as early in the process as possible, help you understand that your customer's voice is extremely valuable, that within this data, you have hidden opportunities to reframe your complaints, but also see them as predictive insights so that you can identify future opportunities. Because if not, and you don't address them, then all the risks that I just articulated are there.
And you've said the magic word. I love the word future because I know our typical listener likes to keep ahead of the curve. So this is a perfect opportunity for me to ask you from your perspective and with your experience in mind, if you got the crystal ball out, what's the next disruption you see coming in this context?
Well, I think that I can only speak to the way as I think I'm disrupting, actually, and I think that this is a nascent opportunity in and upon itself. I think there's a lot more work we have to do in both broadening the tool sets that we have, as well as expanding the domains. So right now we're focused on financial institutions, but we know that complaints are not unique to one industry. As a matter of fact, the earliest complaint, I believe, ever recorded was back in 1700 something BC, and it was written on Babylonian tablets. So the truth is that there's human nature to this, where people are always going to be complaining. So there is always an opportunity to keep building and expanding the capability sets. We understand that we need to focus further on the competitive nature of complaints, on the intersection of the voice of the customer data with the broader behavioral data. And we understand that when we do all of this, right, we can bring new capabilities to market.
And I don't think I heard wrong, did I? When we were talking about what is coming up in the future, I think you just, in part of your answer, referred back to what to me sounded like an example of the very first ever customer complaint letter written. You've gone way back in the past to help us understand what's coming up.
Exactly. And I actually published a piece that went through every period of time from Babylonian times, right, to understand not only how complaints were generated at that time, but also how they were responded to. And one of the things that you see is the commonality of the human nature of the fact that we complain. There are issues, and we always need to be working to get better. And that's just something that will always be the case. And something that I get inspired by every day is to just be better.
Well, it just shows you never know what to expect on the Go Beyond Disruption podcast. Can I ask you to make sure that you send us a link to that so we can include that in the show notes? I think that's fascinating.
Absolutely.
Thank you. All right. Well, before we wrap up, let's do some signposting. For anyone who'd like to find out more about this topic in general, not only about, let's say, the platform or the very first ever recorded example of a customer complaint letter written in Babylonian times, if they want to find out about where we are now and perhaps about your work in particular, where do you recommend they go online to look?
Certainly to positivitytech.com. Mm-hmm. And within positivitytech.com, they can click on Framework. Framework is a monthly newsletter. And then if they want to go back to read more and more issues, they can go do that. Basically, there's also an archive. And on the archive, it says Tal Framework Archives, and they can go in there as well. And they can learn all about the platform and everything that we're doing at our website, positivitytech.com.
And they can connect with you on LinkedIn too, I'd imagine.
Absolutely.
Great. We'll pop that into our show notes as well. Finally, Marcia, what is one actionable suggestion that you would like to leave for accounting and finance professionals that will help them go beyond disruption?
If I had to choose one, I would say that within today's tools and data, it's a lot easier for you to act upon things, so that you need to recognize that your data holds a lot of answers, and that, with the relevant data and analytic capabilities, you have the opportunity to really parse out different types of behaviors that will impact your organization's P&L in a significant way.
I think that's a great place to end our conversation today, but there is plenty more to explore about the topic of data analytics and what we can do to flip the script on what used to be data that we'd prefer not to pay attention to. And that, of course, is data about customer complaints, the insights, the narratives, that and so much more we'll have links to in our show notes. And of course, to view them, you just click on the episode's info icon in your podcast app on your smartphone or your tablet. Also, if you're listening to us via your computer's web browser, you can just click on the info icon there on the episode in the media player on your computer browser, and you'll find everything right there. Two other places to go to as well for anyone interested in taking this further. If you already use the AICPAstore.com, you can go to AICPAstore.com/go-beyond-disruption or CGMAstore.com/go-beyond-disruption. Either site is packed with courses, webinars, and other professional development resources to help you keep ahead of the curve. Thanks again to our guest, Marcia Tal, who was telling us all about the Positivity Tech platform and how to flip the script on customer complaints, turn it into actionable insights that help power your enterprise's future strategies.
Thank you, Kyle, for the opportunity. This was really interesting, and I look forward to listening to the podcast. Thank you again.
It's our pleasure. Of course, thanks to Marcia. And of course, thank you for listening to this podcast. If you've enjoyed it, go tell someone about it. Share it online. You can even share your opinion with us. Email us using the feedback link in the show notes. Tell us what you think. We'd love to hear from you what you'd like to hear more of. From our London office, I'm Kyle Hannon. We'll be back soon with more conversations that help you and your profession to go beyond disruption. Till next time, goodbye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond Disruption, brought to you by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. Learn more about today's topic at AICPA-CIMA.com/disruption. This podcast is designed to provide illustrative information with respect to the subject matter covered and does not represent an official opinion or position of the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants or any of its subsidiaries or affiliates. It is provided with the understanding that the association, its affiliates, and subsidiaries are not engaged in rendering legal, accounting, or other professional services. If such advice or expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional person should be sought. The association, its subsidiaries, and affiliates make no representations, warranties, or guarantees as to and assume no responsibility for the content or application of the material contained herein and expressly disclaim all liability for such damages arising out of the use of, reference to, or reliance on such material.